Great. Awesome. Well, welcome, Jason, to Uncover with Dale. Thank you again so much for this opportunity. This is just an honor. Anything that's going to help, people to move forward and get unstuck. It's pretty much what my show is about. But with your new novel, Move Forward, Get Unstuck, Move Forward. How did you, let's start, before we dive in the book, let's kind of backtrack to 2011 with your mental health and how you got on this path to recovery and also writing this novel.
Yeah, happy to. So thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So Get Unstuck and Move Forward with Your Life was really inspired by a series of events that happened that culminated in 2011. I will lovingly
Mm.
tell your listeners today I had a breakthrough, but in all fairness, I absolutely had a breakdown.
Yes.
Prior to that, I had been to the mountaintop. I had had a very successful stream of businesses as an entrepreneur, and really experienced life in a way that many will not. And when the 2008 financial crash happened, I was not left unscathed like so many other
Mhm.
people. And it really it it put into light the awareness of my entire identity had been based on what I did, not who I was. So,
Right.
my breakdown actually didn't happen in 2008. It extended
Progressed.
out
It
over a few
slowly
years.
extended. Yeah.
Yeah, and it culminated in 2011. And really, what I can say is, I lost my money, my mind, and my way. And
Yeah.
the result of that really was some pretty catastrophic things that I went through that I wouldn't want for anybody. But realistically, the understanding that most men that had been through the life that I had lived and the situations I had experienced would not have made it out of that.
Yeah.
So there was this mustard seed of faith that was planted somewhere in the midst of that breakdown, breakthrough moment of recognizing, like, you've gotten through this and you will go on to continue to live. And really, the question for me was, how are you going to show up and serve others,
Hmm.
in your mission to move forward? And what really evolved for me is, I believe I'm here to change how the world sees mental health, to evolve those conversations that have
Yes.
often been stagnant or stayed stuck or stigmatized, that really keep people from being forthright about the things that anyone can struggle with. I mean, from my perspective, everyone struggles. That is
Yes.
a universal thing.
Yes, definitely. And, we've talked about on my show many times the dangers of placing our identity in our jobs, our marriages, our employer. I mean, families, because, all those things are fleeting and they can be taken away at any moment and you'll be crushed. And a lot of people, that's a deal breaker. They give up. It's easy to fall into that though. Even with my podcast, I have to remind myself this can end at any time, even though it's helping my mental health. I try to be realistic about it. So I'm sure you kind of learned from that as well. The money is fleeting, the employment,
It
things can
all
change. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all fleeting, and the reality is any of those things that are distractions from having a deeper connection and relationship to ourselves can
Hmm.
be a trap that could lead you to places that you don't really want to go. Like, I
Yeah.
like to refer to these experience now, or I've got these T-shirts that I get to wear. I had a breakdown, I filed bankruptcy, I lost everything. Like, I
Oh,
see
I
those
love
as
it.
T-shirts that I have put on and been able to take off and appropriately place where they go. But really, the book was conceived from those experiences of recognizing that, I don't think that everyone has to hit rock bottom to make changes in their lives. I do believe change
Yeah.
is one of those things that usually comes from most of us from a place of pretty extreme pain or discomfort of continuing to do what we're doing. But the reality is I think there are station points along the way that, if we're really plugged into self,
Hmm.
we have the capacity to, discern and imagine something different for our lives and take a different course of action. And that's really what the book was created as,
Yeah.
was a roadmap to do that, to meet people where they are. I don't want anybody to go through what I went through. It was horrible. Like, there were
Yeah.
many things that happened that I would never want to experience again. But in that same understanding, I recognize that for me and who I was and how I'm wired, if it hadn't been that big and it hadn't been that catastrophic, I'm not sure I would have ended up in the result that I've ended up with. I think I likely would have tried to rebuild the same life that I had just burned to the ground. And that was
Mhm.
my path.
Yeah, it's kinda like, an alcoholic doing the same thing over and over again with the same results, right? You're
Right.
not making any changes, it's a merry-go-round. I know with you, it was a progression, to get to where you were, to make a change. For me, it was the loss of my mother 2 years ago, being a caregiver, her mental health status, and, when you hit a point like that, you look at your life, "Okay, I got all this free time now." I chose to make some changes. I started writing, doing the podcast, but it was like a wall losing her because my life was so wrapped around her. And
Right.
so, whoever's listening, it can be something catastrophic. It can be a progression of things over time. But I
Of
like how
course.
your book lays out clear, actionable steps, easy to understand. It's very simple to apply to your life. How you wrote it, the career transactions, it's never too late. Like what would you say to our listeners about, hey, I need to make some changes. I'm not happy. I'm doing the same thing over again. Get
Yeah,
that courage. Yeah.
I think that's a great question. I mean, the thing that I'm reminded of, and I tried to make the book really simple and straightforward because I want to be clear, doing this work is not easy. If it
Mhm.
was, more people would do it. So, like,
Yeah.
let's level set the conversation with this work takes a certain type of person that's willing to be introspective and explore at a deeper level.
Mhm.
In simple terms, the analogy I imagine is we all are climbing a staircase. And as you know, you get up the staircase one step, maybe two steps if you're athletic at a time, but you
Mhm.
still have to go up the steps to get to the top of it. And I think so many of us get focused on the top step that we miss all the steps in between. And when
Yeah.
you're reimagining what your life might look like and you have a glimpse of that, I think what plagues so many of us is we imagine there's too many steps, it's too hard. And so we end up frozen and doing nothing. Well, the reality is you only get up the staircase one or two steps at a time, first of all,
Mhm.
and every step matters. And when I say every step matters, even if you decide to do something simple with commitment and consistency, I think that's really key that we can go into more if you'd like. With
Yeah,
commitment and
definitely.
consistency, I think it's important to reframe that every step is still a step.
Mhm.
And every step you take is still moving you up that staircase to the direction you want to go. So I hear people dismiss taking a step because they think it's not going to make a difference. Perhaps it is not the thing that's going to change your life, but it
Yeah.
is still a step that is moving you closer to the thing you want and away from the things that you don't. And I think that's really important just to see the simple analogy of the staircase. Like you're only going to get up by climbing the steps.
Yeah, 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 definitely. And just taking one day at a time and keeping your goal in check. So with the career, before we get into relationships, I kind of, especially relationships, because I know everybody's probably having some type of relationship issue going on. They want to make changes. But as far as career transactions, it's never too late, age wise. Stepping out of your comfort zone, learning something new, even if you're just turned 50, it's never too late. So, what would you say about people who are afraid to kind of make that career change to make their lives better, to be happier? Like,
Well, first and foremost, you're never going to be younger than you are right now, whatever age you are. Every day that goes forward, you're going to be older than the day before. So,
mhm,
recognizing that. And I think, getting realistic about what are the goals that you're seeking and are there some sub goals that need to happen
mhm,
before you reach that goal? I think, it's wonderful to set these big audacious goals for ourselves, but to recognize that you may need some additional training or learning
yeah,
or insights around achieving the things that you're saying you want. And you have a responsibility to do that. I mentioned those
yeah,
two words, commitment and consistency, a minute ago. And the reason that's really important, and I walk through this as an exercise in my book, is if you cannot pick things that you're willing to do with commitment and consistency, they're not your thing.
yeah,
So if you can't give it an 8, 9, or a 10 out of a scale of 1 to 10 that you're willing to show up and do it committedly and consistently, it's not your thing. Pick something else. And
yeah,
I think so many of us pick things that are beyond our reach to stretch ourselves. And sometimes we need an easier stretch goal as a starting point to really move the needle. And I find once you're willing to do those things with commitment and consistency, it builds that muscle memory of, "Oh, I did that. I achieved that. Look where I started. Look where I am now." And it builds upon our capacity to go and maybe do that next thing that is harder or inch closer to the goals that we have for ourselves. And I think that's applicable. I don't care if it's in a career or in a relationship or take your pick. Like, you get to choose your own adventure here and decide what are you showing up for. And if you're going to make the commitment to do it with consistency, and you will reach the goals that you're wanting to achieve if you continue doing it.
And the book mentions finding purpose in life, patterns, a roadmap. So a roadmap is kind of like it's going to give you guidance on how to achieve what you need. So a roadmap is important. You mentioned that in the book, and
Sure.
also changing patterns and habits. Trying to let go of habits that are not working for you, and I guess implementing ones that do. Whether
Right.
it's getting up early in the morning to work out, get some energy for the day. Going to bed, getting decent sleep, but all of that plays a role in being successful in life and in your careers.
Right.
Um,
And if those are not your things, pick something different. If
yeah.
you're not interested in getting up in the morning and you want to
Mhm,
exercise in the evening, do that. Like, I think the beautiful thing about any of this work is you get to choose what works for you. And if you learn that it doesn't work for you and it's
mhm.
not a direction you want to go, you can pivot and go another direction. Like, that's what's so wonderful about free will and being legal in 21, Like,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can choose a new adventure for ourselves.
yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And what would you say on relationships? I guess just to share briefly, with my mom passing, I actually cleaned house. I
Right.
probably should have waited a little bit longer because they say after you're grieving, you should wait to make any big decisions. But at the end of the day, the relationships that are not growing, they're not working, they're causing me anxiety at night. How would you tell your readers how to overcome that or how to get started with kind of unhealthy
That's a
relationships?
great question, Dale, and I don't think that that's uncommon for people to make those kind of cleaning house decisions in a
Yeah.
moment where everything has changed or there's a lot of uncertainty. I think things happening really reveal who's in your corner and who's not, who's going the direction you wanna go and who isn't. And, the thing that I can say was the most painful in my experience of beginning again was
Mhm.
looking at those 20 and 25-year friendships that I had nurtured and put a lot of energy into, and they were nowhere to be found when the wheels came off the wagon. And
Oh,
there
wow.
is a real awareness from that place that is painful and it's
Yeah.
heartbreaking, but I also had to come back to the realization I set those relationships up to be exactly what they ended up being. Like, I
Mhm.
kept those relationships at arm's length, even though I valued them and thought that they were important. It was now new awareness to reveal that, like, these are not your people. So, like, that was
Yeah.
really, really hard for me. I spent
Oh,
hours in therapy unpacking that. But
yeah,
with
I'm
regards
sure.
to relationships, I think before we talk into any of our relationships outside of ourselves, we have to start with the what are you doing to nurture the relationship you have with yourself?
Yeah.
So many of us pick these external validators to support us as we move forward in life in relationship, and we don't have a good relationship with ourselves. So
Mhm.
really, what
Yeah.
we're attracting as we move through life are mirrors of other people that are going to mirror unhealed parts of ourselves, wounded parts of ourselves. That's why we get triggered in relationships. The
Yeah.
invitation, I believe, is to strengthen and deepen the connection with yourself. And if
Yeah.
you have a solid relationship with you, the reflection you're gonna get is people that show up that mirror those parts of you that you've worked hard to attain and get. And if they don't, it's really easy to say, "This is not a good fit for me." Or maybe this is not an A tier level friend, maybe this is a C or a D tier level friend that I do
Mhm.
these types of activities with. And I think setting appropriate and healthy boundaries around what does healthy relationship look like? I think that's the starting point. I mean, ultimately, all comes back to the relationship you have with yourself
Mhm.
and the accountability you're willing to take to set healthy boundaries with yourself and then with others.
Yes, I love that. And also at the end of the day, everyone I do believe some people were meant to meet on the journey for a season and we needed each other, whether it was beneficial. Like I met women and men during COVID. I met a walking partner. She was amazing. But 4 years later, I'm like, I don't really have much in common with her.
We're not
And
walking because we're in lockdown anymore.
yeah, yeah, but we were there for each other during COVID, and she lost her mother, I lost my mother, and it was like, okay, now we're on the other side, and I'm healed. I'm still in therapy on and off, but
Right.
I realize I don't think she has the same values as me, and I didn't mean to hurt her, but I chose, this year to kind of mutually end that. But I really do believe we met each other for a
For a
reason.
season.
And yeah, for a season, and, the Codependent No More book, that
That's
really
a good
helped me
one.
to open-handed. All relations, it's an open hand. I don't suffer, I don't know what you have to say about that, but
Well,
it's some people are fierce friends, they don't wanna let go.
well, and I agree with that. But first, I want to affirm the fact that it sounds like you're doing the work to really reveal, does this fit or does it not fit? And just
Yeah,
because it once fit doesn't mean that it always will. What I see when people have those fierce friendships, and I'm not saying their fierce friendships are appropriate and necessary,
mhm,
and I hope we all have them. But the reality is many people claim things are fierce friendships because they are afraid, if I let this go, there's nothing else to replace it. And what
yes,
I want to share with your listeners is, if you're not willing to let it go, how does anything new show up?
yeah,
So, being responsive to what's coming up in your processing and recognizing, like, we don't have similar values, or this met my needs in a season and it no longer does. Like, that to me is really healthy and really appropriate. But I think it scares a lot of people to death. Like,
it
thinking
does.
about, like, oh my gosh, like, we've been friends forever. What does it look like if I walk away from this friendship? Like, I want to affirm for people that are listening, you don't have to blow it up. Like, it is
Mhm,
okay to move in a different direction. We all have seasons in lives, and to say, I need something different. And if you want to have the conversation around what you need differently in that relationship and see if that person is willing to meet you there or not, like, thoughtful
yeah.
conversation will reveal moving in a different direction in a healthy adult way.
Yeah, yeah, and I love how you, mentioned that in your book, chasing love, being in love, you know, you kinda hit on it, but I think a lot of people also are chasing that feeling of being in love, also in the intimacy relationships, and, they jump from one thing to another when you realize, you can't be in love. I don't know if you have read C.S. Lewis, but, that would you can't stay being in love. Your emotions, your adrenaline, your body, it's just not theoretically, possible. But I
Yeah.
think in our society, we chase that feeling. I know I have in the past, and it's not realistic, you
I think
know?
we're all guilty of doing those things, but the fact of the matter is, as humans, most of us chase many things, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, addiction, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah,
Really, at its root cause, the core of it comes down to, we are chasing things external to our relationship with self. Like, I ultimately think it all comes back to, what is the relationship that you have with yourself that
with
you're willing
yourself.
to
Yeah.
nurture? And I'm going to affirm again, it's hard work. If this
Mhm.
was easy, more people would do it. But I will tell you that the more you try to do it and choose yourself first, because look, the longest relationship you're going to be in life with is yourself, like,
Right.
regardless. There's
Yeah.
nobody else that's going to do your entire life with you the way that you will. So,
Mhm.
it's interesting to me um how unwilling we become to do um the work that brings us closer to ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's scary to revisit your childhood to see where this codependency came from, or where this mindset came from, and I'm sure you had to revisit some areas in your childhood just to kinda get to know Jason as a child and
I
how.
still am.
Yeah,
I mean, the reality is most of us are spending our entirety of our lives undoing things that happened in the first 5 to 8 years of our lives. And again, it's not to to make your parents bad people or things that happen.
Yeah.
This is not about blame. Ultimately, it comes down to taking responsibility for all the things that have happened. I mean, I have done a tremendous amount of trauma work. I've done a tremendous amount of work around healing that wounded child. And I mean, I have an incredible trauma history, especially in my young formative years. And the
Mhm.
reality is that, 51 years old, it's not appropriate for me to blame my parents for what they did or
No.
didn't do. Like,
Yeah.
I genuinely believe as humans, we intend to do our best. And sometimes our best is not good enough.
Yeah.
And if you're 50 years old and you're still dug into my parents did this or that person did that, and you're not taking accountability for your role and honoring the fact that they did the best they could and they probably didn't
Mhm.
have the tools or the information to do differently, and give them some passive grace at some point, like, that's work for you to continue doing, healing those relationships, because ultimately it comes down to what responsibility are you taking for your role. And we all have a role in everything that happens in our lives if you want to get really clear about it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. I also came from trauma as well, 18 years of it. And my mother, she had a mental illness. It wasn't her fault. I always saw it. My siblings didn't see it, but for some reason, I always got it. I'm like, wow, there's literally two people that I'm living with. I'm serious. It was like literally 1 minute she's Jekyll, next minute she's Hyde, and but it wasn't her fault. She was born that way, but she was functional. She
Right.
she she was able to navigate this life, and even my therapist was like, "Your mom for 85 years was able to live with this mental illness." But I look back now, it did shape me. I know my neurons in my brain was affected and all that, but I don't blame her for that. Now I'm just working on healing and
Right.
also retraining my brain, whether it's with a neurologist, therapist, or whatever that looks like for you. But I don't blame her. And I think in a way, it also made me the person who I am. I understand when I come across people like that.
Well, and I think just in the story that you beautifully shared, I think it allows us the opportunity to share a collective sigh of relief. Like when
Mhm.
you turn the dial down and you recognize your mother did the best she could to get through and navigate life, with a mental illness, whether it was treated or not, and still show up and do the things that were required of her, like, that's hard work.
Yeah.
And when you can really frame your people and see them for, like, you could probably go a step back and understand what the relationship was like with her parents and how some of those
Mhm.
things maybe got framed and came into being. Like, it didn't start with us. And I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
that's the really important thing, that we may be byproducts of things that happened along the way, but really at the end of the day, where the conversation begins and ends is, what responsibility are you taking for it in your own life, and what power are you giving to it? At
Yeah.
the end of the reality is who your mother was and her story. While you are a part of that, you weren't walking in her shoes.
Yeah.
So we don't know exactly what that was like for her, other than what she may have told you. But the fact of the matter is, your side of the street is how what she may have done to you affected you, and what are you willing to do to clean that up, to live the most fruitful and productive life you can.
Yes. 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 I agree completely. Now, you mentioned earlier, if we can backtrack just for a
Sure.
minute, that mustard seed of faith. Could you tell me, dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll, not to be too brutal about this, but I mean, I literally, there was a solid year that I spent every day wanting to die. I had lost everything. I often think if I had written a memoir from that time, it would have been called Rolls Royce to Bus Pass. I mean, I climbed a very high mountain and literally fell to. I had a bus pass.
Yeah,
I was living
yeah.
in an extended stay hotel in Colorado the first year because I didn't know what I was going to do.
Mhm.
And I want to be clear, I had a lot of privilege in this conversation. I had supportive parents. I had some resources that got me through. I'm educated. You know,
Mhm.
um,
That's not everyone's story. Yeah.
it's not everyone's story. And I recognize that when I share it, that there's an amazing amount of privilege I have. But what I want to say is, regardless of my privilege, it was still incredibly hard to get connected.
Mm.
And figuring out what to do next, who were the people that could support me, what was my team going to look like that was going to really guide me through this journey, was really important. But I can tell you, two cornerstones leading to that mustard seed of faith were baths and walks. And I would walk 5+ miles a day. I still have the shoes that I walked 1,000 miles in.
Mhm.
And I remember being in that extended stay. I'd get in that bathtub and I'd keep that water on nonstop. Like I didn't care that we were wasting water. Like it didn't turn off. And I might spend 2 or 3
Yeah.
hours in the bathtub, like literally just to heal myself.
Mhm.
And what was revealed as I was going on these walks and taking these baths, considering, I want to die, I need this pain to end, was, well, you haven't died and you don't have a plan. And it's clear that's not your path. And like this mustard seed of faith just revealed to me, like, what if there's another path for you, you know?
Mhm.
And what really was revealed was this seed of me showing up and being in service of others. Now, there is a light and a dark side to that, which we
Yeah.
should talk about, but
Yeah.
really
Yes,
it kind of set forth this work of like, if this was this hard for me, imagine how hard it is for other vulnerable or marginalized or disenfranchised populations to navigate these things. Like
yeah.
it must be impossible. And I can see why people choose a self-guided way out. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to do this work.
Yeah. It is. It is. It takes a daily effort, to put every day. Put one foot one foot in front of the other every day, Jason, and I go with intention and faith. Like you mentioned, just realizing that there's still many years left for me, like, many years left for you, and I wanna utilize those in the best way I can, but it can easily be unstuck. I've spoken to educated people as well who jumped out of buildings and, they survived. I spoke to one author, he wrote about it. His foot caught the hotel curtain and it slowed his descent. Otherwise, he woulda died. He was
I mean,
just
if that's not a testament in faith, I don't know
Yeah,
what is. But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think when you talk about faith and being a person of faith, and again, I don't mean that in a religious sense or a
Right.
spiritual sense. Like you choose what that means for you.
Yeah,
Like for
yeah.
me, it happens to be God. But
Yeah,
you
me
know, but
too, yeah.
but the reality is I think if you're choosing a path of faith, and that's a deeply personal journey, I think you also have to be able to shift your mindset into this notion of grace,
Mhm.
and being able to give yourself grace for these transgressions or mistakes or things that happen, like forgiving myself for the harm that I had caused others, the harm I caused myself, like undoing
Yeah,
a lifetime of work. Like that is a tremendous undertaking,
yeah,
and really, we talked about parents a minute ago and where they come from, like giving them a passive grace. Like I think what's missing in so many of our conversations today is this element of understanding, like, you've not walked a mile in that person's shoes. Like, you literally don't know where they come from, what they're
yeah,
dealing with. And sometimes just being able to give them some grace. Like, I'm not excusing bad behavior, but
mhm.
recognizing there may be more to the story that we don't
Yeah,
know that underscores all of why this person's showing up in this way right now. And that's hard. Like, I get it.
yeah.
It's hard.
It
And if
is, it is.
somebody's done something against us, it doesn't excuse them or necessarily even forgive them, but it says maybe there's more to the story, that I need to add a little more kindness to my response as I'm navigating going through this.
Oh gosh, I love it. It's certain people you realize they've reached the second half of life and they get it. They get it. There's no judgment anymore. There's this woman in Elizabeth, Colorado. She's feeding homeless people out of her food truck and she's barely paying her rent. She's
Right.
like, "You don't know their story." The homeless people, I think, and I'm not gonna paint the broad brush, but I think a lot of judgment comes from not being happy inside, so we lift ourselves up and put someone else down.
Right.
People do that.
Right.
They cast that judgment to feel better about themselves, whether someone who drinks too much or, they're angry, bitter, that's coming from somewhere. Something's happened to them,
I
something
can
happened
tell
to them.
you, amen. But I can tell you, if I had not been willing to show up and do the work to dig deeper for the intense pain that I was feeling, I,
Mhm.
I could have been a byproduct of any of those things. If I had not had supportive parents, I would have been homeless. Like,
Yeah,
the fact of the matter is, I mean, I legitimately went from a Rolls Royce to a bus pass. Like, that's
yeah,
a pretty big descent that most people can't even imagine. And I don't say that for any, bragging rights, but the fact of the
right.
matter is, like, we don't know what people have been through. I was sitting driving to a meeting yesterday in my new car, and I looked over, and there's a homeless guy panhandling, and his sign said homeless and broke. And he had a smile on his face. And I
Yeah.
thought to myself, like, it was 94 degrees outside when I looked down at the temperature gauge. It's hot, it's sunny, it's a beautiful day here in Colorado. But
Yeah.
like, I'm thinking, like, this guy, in spite of whatever he may or may not have been through, like, still has a smile on his face. And I know a
Yeah.
lot of us have judgments about that, and we want to write those stories for like what other people have been through. Like, those are not our stories to write. Those are not our things to judge. Like, if you want to give them money or not is your choice. And if you feel like they're con artists or grifters, or that's your choice too. But the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the guy had a smile on his face.
He smiled a small face. Just like you and I growing up in trauma, when I tell my story to other people, they're like, my therapist said it's really a wonder that I'm functional.
Right.
And that hasn't been easy because I've did the work like you. I've been in therapy for over 20 years. I've read books. I go on walks like you. Water is my healing, kayaking, all of that. I had to find things to help lift myself up and also get healthy mentally. But I think we just cast that judgment so quickly. And
Well, I think you just told us the things that you've been willing to do with commitment and consistency, and you
yeah,
validated how they've helped you.
yeah,
Like, and
yeah.
again, I wanna
It's not
reaffirm.
easy. It
No,
was.
it's not easy, but I wanna reaffirm for anybody that's listening, like, you get to choose what you're willing to do with commitment consistently. Nobody's dictating that for you. If it's a walk, if it's a bath, if it's kayaking,
Mhm.
figure it out. Like,
Yeah, yeah. And not to get religious on our readers, not at all. But going back to identity, that mustard seed, my faith in God. In other words, my faith is not in my husband, it's not in my job, it's not in my family. It has to be in something higher, whatever that looks like to you.
right.
Because the things down here are going to let us down. We're all going to let each other down because we're imperfect. Right? We're
Absolutely.
broken. We're navigating a broken world. Otherwise, as C.S. Lewis says, how can you call a line crooked if you don't know of a straight line? Something has gone terribly wrong in the world we're navigating. Otherwise, we wouldn't care about injustices. We wouldn't care about homeless people. It's so easy to like look at it that way, but a lot of people it's just taking their inner peace. This world is taking their inner peace.
Well, and it takes a lot of energy to stay in that place, like
Yeah.
it's painfully energetic to stay in that place of unresolve,
Mhm.
to not figure out, like, what's that place that brings balance for me. And when you talk about
Yeah.
faith, what faith looks like for me today is really a lot of surrender and letting go of the control that I do not have to begin with, that I have spent a lot of effort and
Mhm.
energy in trying to assert. And I think the more we can, not to be like Elsa here, but let it go, I
Yeah.
think the reality is we end up getting a lot more of what we may not even know we want, intentionally or unintentionally,
Mhm.
through surrender.
Yeah. Yeah. And just realizing, we can only control so much. Like I can control my behavior to a point, but the things that are happening in the world, unfortunately, I do think, like homelessness is always going to be here. But guess what? You can start with one person at a time. you
Absolutely.
know Anxiety, helping someone with anxiety who like me, I suffer from anxiety and PTSD, but I'm getting better, I'm healing, but I can also share my journey with someone else and help them. I'm not going to say I can cure anxiety. So I think, we can get overwhelmed with all the things that are going on in our world, but like your book, you're sharing your story and it's helping so many people who are, I would say I don't know what the percentage is, but I know a lot of people who are stuck. I really do, and you can share that information with them, and then it's their chance to. It's up to them to make those changes.
Right, and that's why I
It,
was so intentional about the title of the book. I also have a radio show of the same name, which is how
oh,
this
okay,
started.
okay,
Get unstuck and move forward with your life. But
okay.
I don't think saying it's too hard is the reason not to begin.
Mhm.
So for me, it was about creating some kind of roadmap that could help people start to put some guardrails around, if I'm going to do the work, where do I begin? And that's what I love about the book is it's pretty straightforward and simple
Yeah.
in how we even approach the process to begin with. And again, I can't reiterate enough the value and the importance of
Mhm.
fostering relationship with yourself. It's
Yeah. It
it's
starts with
everything.
you.
It's
It starts
everything.
with you. It starts with you. One thing about your book I like is the questions. You kinda tar I'm seeing more of that, and I love it. It's kinda challenging the readers to think about their situation, and you go through a series of questions with them.
Well,
So
it's
what
funny, I have friends that read it and said, "Oh, I didn't expect I was gonna have to do homework."
Yeah,
And so my
yeah.
suggestion has been is, like, if you're not prepared to do the homework, read it through and then go back and answer the questions. Maybe you need all of the context before you come back and answer those, but, I was really intentional about asking those thought-provoking questions
Mhm.
to help us move through some of these things. And again, it goes back to, this is
It's
not easy.
yeah.
Like, I while it's got pretty colors and, it's got some thoughtful questions in it, the
Yeah,
fact of the matter is you do have to dig a little deeper to get to
you
the
do.
kind of the meat of it, but, like, it's all doable.
Oh, yeah, it is, and, with the way we can write books today, most of our well, I shouldn't say most, but, I think, ADHD, my therapist says most people have some version of it, so your book is easy to read, it's clean, and we do easily get, distracted while reading, but, I think your book is right on target. It's very simple and it targets that attention span. But I think the questions, where are you at right now, or whatever those questions are, it's going to cause readers to think about their life and like, wow, I am doing the same thing for the last 10 years, nothing's changing. I need to work on myself. If you're not comfortable sitting with yourself, going on those walks that you mentioned earlier, um, reflecting on your life, what needs to be adjusted, what's not benefiting me right now, you know
Well, and I think getting real with yourself around, if you're finding a reluctance to do the deeper work, really maybe starting with, how much time are you spending numbing out? Scrolling
Mhm.
on social media, perhaps involved or engaged in an addiction or even a hobby that maybe has taken kind of front and center stage in your life. Like, start there. Like look for the clues or the cues that might could point you in a direction of, oh, maybe this is maybe something's gone off track somewhere and there's a place to explore from there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think a little bit, I can see a little bit in your personality. I don't know if it's true or not. You can correct me, but I don't know if you seem like you're a very open person. Like I'm one of those people where I used to be. I would just randomly give out my number. Oh yeah, let's go connect. Let's go have fun. But now that I'm older, 'cause and after so many, like, mistakes with friendships, I kinda take a step back. "Oh, let's get to know each other first. I met you at pickleball, you seem really cool. Let's go on a walk first." But sometimes I just I would jump in, and
Yeah,
it's
I
just
I I'm kind of like you that way. I don't
Yeah.
I'm pretty guarded with, the things that I wanna foster as relationship. I mean, part of it is the work that I do is very relational and people-centric, so I give a lot of
Mhm,
that away in work, and I had mentioned earlier
mhm,
the light and the dark side of being in service. The thing that has been revealed from that mustard seed of faith that has now grown into, some
mhm.
version of a tree, really is that the realization that you cannot pour from an empty cup. And I
Yeah,
think to the point that you're making, I gave a lot away for a long time and didn't expect a whole lot in return. And part of it's because I feel like I didn't deserve more in return based on how catastrophically my life had been uprooted. As I've continued to do the work and realize it's like, I sustainably cannot do the work in service of others if I don't take care of myself first. So I'm pretty protective about that energy. And
mhm.
at my core, I'm an introvert. I can show up and be extroverted when needed, but like I don't recharge around other people. And, like,
Yeah.
recognizing that and honoring it really has given me the gift and luxury of saying, "No, that doesn't work for me," or, "No, I
Yeah.
can't participate in that." And, like, sometimes people's feelings get hurt, but at the end of the day, I honor myself. Like, I'm not giving
Yeah.
away more than I want to. So,
Yeah. I was, while you're talking I'm listening too, I wanted to pull up your podcast also so we can
yeah,
share
so I have 2,
that.
get unstuck, move forward with your life, and nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Nobody's
Yeah.
Perfect is a mental health podcast designed for, youth and parents, specifically, or providers
Okay.
and care people who support youth. We
Mhm.
talk about the challenging conversations, that are impacting youth and their mental health today. We have an entire
Oh, I
initiative
love
around
that.
that.
I love it.
Yeah,
That is so
it's being in service of me is ensuring people get connected to resources. Like,
Mhm.
that really, and having conversations that are not commonplace or, often had, that but need to be had.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did you get your podcast going?
So my
How long
first
have you been
podcast was one called Teen Talk, started in 2018. Get Unstuck
Okay.
and Move Forward with Your Life started in 2022, and
Okay.
Nobody's Perfect started in 2023.
Okay.
So, and I have a new podcast I'm conceiving,
Oh,
called The
wow.
Unspoken, and it's really going to be about those stories that we may not have shared out loud, that have really
Mhm.
kind of navigated and guided us in life. And I think they're going to be a little more raw, and a little
Okay.
more real. Um, but I'm really
Okay.
excited to launch that.
Now, and, just to backtrack a little bit, I'm sorry, did you start writing first, like, to get when you're on your journey to healing and then the book, or you just kinda
I'm saying no. I mean, I had conceived a book. I lost 3 pretty close people in my life to suicide in
Oh,
2016,
oh my
and,
goodness.
I decided at that time I would sit down and write the stories from my unraveling, and I
Mhm.
did, and, like, something about it didn't feel right, so I didn't make the commitment to write Get Unstuck and Move Forward with Your Life, um, until about a year and a half ago. It took me a year to write the book and get it published.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was a very dedicated. It took me about 7 months to write the book, and then I had a pretty great publicist that said, "I think your book is really good. I think it could be great.
Mhm.
Let's rewrite the first section." So, like that, like, it took me a month to process that I was gonna have to do this again. I thought I was done, and I
Yeah.
went and rewrote that. So it took about a year to do that. For full transparency, I'm not a great journaler. I know a lot of
Mm.
people like that. I mean, I'm a processor. Like, I'm in my head. Like, I work
Yeah.
through things, kind of
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
way. When I sit down and talk to somebody else about something, I've normally worked out, like, kind of what I'm going to do, in the direction I'm going to go. Like,
Yeah.
I feel pretty solid in that path for me. But I would say podcasting really came first, but writing has kind of always been a quasi cornerstone of
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was writing in grade school. My teacher's like, "Oh, wow, you make up these stories in your head?" And I'm like, "Yeah," because I was processing the trauma, but I lost that because of what I was going through. And then when I lost my mother, it's like I couldn't stop writing. I just wanted to tell her story, and I actually have a pending book about her, but
Good.
I just I think that there's so many people don't realize, that women can be abusers. And when I tell my story and when they look at pictures of my mom, they're like, really?" I'm like, "Yeah." She was a
Yeah.
beautiful lady, very funny, but there was 2 sides to her. But anyway, when she passed, I just couldn't stop writing. And it was just like therapy for me. It was just
Well, and I love that you've chosen that way to really kind of heal through that. I mean, it's
Mhm.
interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I had a grandmother, that was pretty chronically and persistently mentally ill, and,
Mhm.
according to my mother, I'm the only person she ever loved, which is
Oh,
painful to hear and understand. But,
oh, no.
we had a deeply complex relationship, my grandmother and I. And I mean, I
Mhm.
absolutely believe she is my primary guardian angel, but she was complicated.
Yeah.
And it's one of
Yeah.
those things that it's easy to judge a book by its cover and assume that, "Oh, how could that person not be a nice person, or how could they cause harm or do that?" And the
Yeah.
reality is you and I both know from lived experience, like, that absolutely can happen. And,
It can.
the effects of it can last a lifetime, and it can be
Oh,
really
yeah.
complicated to unpack.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even in grade school, I started being a bully because I was growing up I was in an environment, And luckily, the school system that I was in Texas, I was going they gave me therapy. They put me in, like, therapy to work with Muppets and stuff. I was just so thankful to get that help at an early age, that anger, when you grow up in that trauma, you have an inner anger, and if you don't deal with that, it can take over your life, and
Right.
it's
Well,
just yeah.
like I said, most of us are wounded children
Mhm.
walking through life unpacking the first 5 to 8 years of our lives.
Yeah.
And if anybody thinks otherwise, I ask you, I invite you, to
Mhm.
ask yourself a question, like, if you are
Mhm.
angered, or you upset, or you feel triggered, ask yourself in that moment, "How old do
Yeah.
you feel? How do I
Yeah.
feel?" And I think what you will connect with, it is likely not your real age. It is some wounded version of yourself as a teenager or a young person. And
Mhm.
really, if that's what's revealed, that's where your work is to do. It's to reconnect with, and let me be clear, not to get too deep on this, like,
No, no,
as a
please.
as a grown adult, we have the capacity to parent those younger wounded versions of ourselves.
Mhm.
We have the capacity to go back and say to them, "You're safe. I've got your back. I love you. I'm gonna take care of you now." Like, and sometimes that's all those younger wounded versions of ourselves really need to heal. They need to be valued, seen, and heard. And it's
Yeah.
odd to think about as an adult, you're going back and imagining this. Invite them to come sit in your lap. Like, I understand this is a visual exercise, but like, have that conversation. Like, Dale, I know you needed to hear this at 13 years old. I'm
Yeah.
going to give that to you now. And like, it sounds ridiculous, but it is transformational and healing in
Mhm.
ways that so many other things are not. You have the capacity to parent a younger you right now,
Yeah.
right where you are.
Yes. Yeah. Hug that inner child. I don't know if you saw the movie Rocket Man with Elton John,
Uh-huh.
but my favorite scene in that is when he's able to hug himself as a little boy and just accept his dad was who his dad was, and he did the
Right.
best he could. And he loved himself, even though that negativity and no self worth had been put into him. I've watched it like 10 times, but it's
Yeah,
one of
it's a great movie, and it's so revealing on, those
yeah.
healing things. I mean, I did this work very committedly with a trained professional for a long time, and part of that work was carrying those pictures around of younger wounded versions of me so I could visually look at them and identify. And again, you talk
Mhm.
about a picture telling 1,000 words, like, if you knew what was going on behind those eyes and those smiles at those times, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But, like, it was really easy to connect with them when I could visually look at a picture and say, "Oh gosh, like, I'm so sorry that you went through that." And the beautiful work about doing child work is,
Mhm.
it allows us to have compassion for those younger wounded versions of ourselves. And I have found for me, when we talked about earlier taking responsibility and letting go of
Mhm.
blame for your parents and people who hurt you, it really, if you can do it for yourself, it makes it far easier to have that same compassion for others, even those people who absolutely were part of your trauma history.
Yeah. 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 It takes a lot of effort. I mean, and I get it why my siblings never really were able to forgive my mom. They really suffered more than I did, and I hope one day they can make peace with that. A couple of them still use her as excuse for how their lives is today, and my sister and I, we went into the military. We also, we got therapy through the military and also through our regular jobs. But some of those siblings, unfortunately, they just they're kind of stuck, and
And
all I
what's
can do is share.
and what's heartbreaking about that is your mother has passed. Like, they're never gonna get from her what they needed. Like, being
Yeah.
able to take that armor off and lay it down, I think, is so important. And again, I'm not dismissing anybody's story or their journey. You're entitled to
Hmm.
feel exactly how you feel. All I am suggesting is there may be an alternate feeling that you've not experienced yet in a
Yeah.
given situation, and with committed work consistently, you can heal those wounded parts of yourselves. It's always going to be part of your story, but
Yeah.
you don't have to turn the volume up on that story maybe quite so much to
Yeah.
navigate life. And I think that that's real responsibility for what are you giving power to or not in your own life.
Yeah, don't let it rob you of your future, you
Correct.
know? I could really talk to you all day, Jason. I would love to have you back again, but I would
Happy to
like
come.
to leave the listeners with one thing. I guess maybe what would you say about leaving the door open for some relationships? What would that look like to you?
I think if it is a relationship that has caused you harm, I think it is appropriate to say, I have valued and appreciated this relationship, but at this time, I'm not getting my needs met here. And
Mhm.
until we can come together in a place that serves both of us equally and moving forward, I want to take a step back. And again, if that person gets upset or angry with you or cusses you out or does whatever, that is about them.
Yeah,
You will never regret owning and cleaning up your side of the street and speaking your truth in your voice. I get is hard, hard, hard for so many of us. But what's harder is not speaking your voice and continuing down a path that continues to hurt you,
yeah,
and and you've taken no responsibility for your role in.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. Yeah, you definitely got to take care of yourself first before you even think about keeping something that's not benefiting you, a toxic relationship or whatever that might look
Right.
like. We have about 8 minutes. I would love for you to share just anything on your heart, Jason, that you really want the readers to focus on getting unstuck. Just something that really resonated with you to help you get started on your journey. That person who's at their last rope. Anything on your heart that you would like to share, and I hope I'm not catching you off guard because
No,
you
no.
have a lot of information.
Well, I'm thinking because there's several things going through my head, and that's such
No,
a
and
thought-provoking question.
feel free to
Um,
share it a couple. It doesn't,
yeah,
we got
I think about in my book, I share a story. So, when I had my breakdown, I it happened very quickly, over the course of a year, but really there was a 12-week period that was pretty nuts.
Mhm.
And I ended up in an altercation in the airport with a policeman. And I
Oh,
had never been in an altercation with a policeman before or with anybody really, certainly not even
yeah.
physical, and I called the police in that moment because I thought that I was going to it started with a ticket agent at the airport, and I called the police because I
Okay.
wasn't getting my way out of a sense of entitlement and privilege and a manic episode.
Yeah, right.
I decided that, I needed to call the police to share my side of the story. Well, that didn't go my way, and I end up on the ground. I thought he was breaking my arm, you
Oh,
know,
oh my
I
goodness.
ended up with a felony because of that. Like,
Oh, oh my goodness.
I
Yeah.
and the district attorney had said, "We're going to make an example of you. You're a rich, white, entitled guy, and you're used to getting your way, and blah blah blah." Long, complicated story. But what
Mhm.
comes from that
Uh-huh.
was throughout the course of the next 4 months, I spent 72 days in jail in 3 different stints. I'd also written some hot checks. I was in a very complicated mind state.
Right. Yeah.
And just so happened these things happened in 3 different states. So like I could have bonded out, but I couldn't because I had charges in the other, and it became a very complicated thing. But I
Okay.
tell this story because the thing that I learned in a moment in jail was um, jail is a really phenomenal equalizer.
Mhm.
We come into life and we have our things and our armor, and we think that we're impenetrable about certain things, and I certainly had lived this big and wild life, and to realize in a moment I am locked in a cell with a man who was later convicted of murdering his business partner and
Oh
chopping
my
him up and dumping him out of the trunk of his Mercedes in the desert.
oh,
A
wow.
con man who had scammed all these people out of his money, a park ranger who had, in a drug fueled um, scene, robbed a fast food establishment and then got on the bus to get picked up, like 2 stops later.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Regardless of where you enter that conversation, every one of us are still there. We're not going
Mhm.
home. We're not getting out, at least in that moment in that day. And the fact of the matter is it didn't matter who you were or what you had or what your experience was or your education or your privilege, any of that. None of it mattered. We were all
Yeah.
equal in that moment. And I
Yeah.
think from that recognition and understanding of as we've talked about in this episode, that nuance of you've not walked a mile in anybody's shoes. I think it's so important and so applicable to recognize that
Mhm.
regardless of all of those things that we think make us special or different or unique, like at its core, we are all humans walking this earth doing our best to get through,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
really important. And I share that story only because, I mean, and it was certainly, one of the most painful and humiliating things I've ever been through. I share that story because I walked into that jail believing I was different, I was special, I didn't belong there. And while maybe I didn't, and maybe most of the people there think the same thing about themselves, it
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
matter. It didn't matter what I believed because in that moment I wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love that. I actually wrote a book about the invisible line between us and people in prison. It's a very thin line. Your life can change in a moment. That
Absolutely.
extra glass of wine after dinner, your kid unfortunately decides to go to do a shooting at a school. The parents are now getting sent to jail. And
Right.
these are, really well off, wealthy. I'm sure they never saw themselves going to prison. So that
And I'm
thin
just so
line.
grateful that I didn't. The DA wanted me to.
Yeah, yeah,
She
I'm
was gonna
glad you
make an
didn't.
example out of me, and again, because of privilege and my parents were willing to pay the legal bills to defend
Mhm,
me, I ended up, not having that. I mean, the outcome is I did end up with a felony, and, I've thought a lot about I could I go back and get those records sealed or expunged? And the answer is yes. I've talked about it so much at this point.
mhm.
It is not something I'm proud of, but I mean, again, it's part of that
Journey.
layered history that is my story. And
Yeah,
for anybody who thinks that they can't end up in a deep, dark place that is unimaginable, let me tell you, you can.
yeah,
And it
yeah,
can happen
yeah,
in a minute.
yeah,
In a
yeah,
minute. I want to reiterate, I called the police that day myself. I dialed
mhm.
911 and it resulted in me ending up in the
In a
situation
jail.
I ended up in. So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know, don't assume that that privilege necessarily negates you escaping some of the challenges that we have in life. And we have prisons that are full of wounded children.
oh,
You know,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I feel like, we have politicians running our world that are wounded children. We see these things playing out, like, when we recognize that we are all wounded children walking through and doing our part to get through, it really reframes how we see people in our world. It doesn't excuse anybody's behavior, but it does reframe that there's more to the story than just seeing them in this moment, in this context, with this action. There is more to
mhm.
the story. There's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
more.
There's always more, and, that line is thin, so, I many times I probably should have, been on that other side, but it's just by the grace, by the grace of God, because I tell people my story, whether it's having an extra glass of wine or whatever, they were pulled over for DUIs, in prison, their life, and the bail money, you know how that works. Most people in prison, they didn't have the bail money for little petty crimes. Some of them
Well,
little petty crimes.
and let me be clear, you can end up with a six-figure legal bill real fast for something that happened in a moment.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's something most people are not prepared for.
they're not. But Jason, I just wanna thank you again. This has been amazing. I could see us having lunch and just going talking about all this. I just love it. It's so healing for me and also for my listeners because I know your story is gonna really touch many people as it is already with your books and your podcasts. Thank you for what you're doing. The philosophy of my show is our story is a gift. You should never hide your story no matter how dark it is because you're going to help other people and you're going to resonate. People, oh my God, he went through what I went through. So I just want to thank you for what you're doing. It's great.
Well,
Any
Dale,
final words? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to say the pleasure is mine. I'm so grateful for the light that you're bringing on the world into the
Oh,
world,
thank
and
you.
I'm happy
Thank
to contribute. And I would love to have lunch sometime.
Yes,
I think these conversations are so necessary. And again,
they
to your
are.
point, like, you know, the things that happen to us in the dark need to live in the light. Like that. That's
Yes.
where there's hope and healing.
Yes, amen. I agree completely. Well, Jason Hopkins, Get Unstuck and Move Forward with Your Life can be located on Amazon. Jason, if you'll just hang out for a minute after I play the outro exit,
I'd
I'll
be
give you a little bit of information. Okay. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.